Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's Napa Perkins from Electra Astrology. We're going to go into sacred partnership today. I think sacred partnership is something that everyone wants. We idealize the perfect partnership, the one that lasts forever, where we always feel safe and secure, grounded, seen, loved. We also know that you have to put a lot of work into those kind of partnerships. And astrologically, partnerships are all over the board. We come together in romances, in business, and friendships for multiple reasons, and it is layered. But when we're talking about Juno, which is what we're going to talk about today, it comes with the idea of the evolution of the relationship, the deepening of the partnership. So let's get into it. We all have Juno in our charts somewhere, and we are all impacted by Juno. Sometimes it's a really strong archetype in the chart, and sometimes it's not. And it can get really strong if we're under a transit or something like that. Usually, when clients come to me and they're dealing with relationship issues, I go immediately to look at Juno or Venus, the seventh house as well, to get a sense of what's really happening. And Juno gives so much potent information about, especially the nature of the longer term relationships. So, if you don't have my Astrology is a Superpower free ebook, you can get that in the box below if you're on YouTube, or I've put it in the show notes for Star Narratives if you're listening on the podcast. And a big hello and welcome to all of you, no matter where you're listening from. Make sure that you're liking, subscribing, somehow interacting with these teachings. Just it boosts the algorithm and it helps this information get shown to more people. And send this podcast or this YouTube video to people that you think might enjoy it. We're getting deep. We are going into the spiritual, psychological aspects of the astrology chart because we each have all of these archetypes in our chart. We're using them as ways to understand our own psychology. And as we talked about last week with Juno, we went through Juno as the commitment archetype and how oftentimes when we get into the initial part of relationship, which is the Venus part of relationship, it's where we're really attracted and we are attracting and we're really into the pleasure, the flirtation, the passion of the relationship. But as we spend more time with this person and we deepen in, the nature of the relationship undergoes quite a bit of change. And then we're looking at these themes around commitment. What am I committing to? Oftentimes we're committing to the lofty ideas of, I want to be with you. I want to build a home with you. I want to create a family with you. And then we start dialing down and we start looking at all of the actual commitments that we're making, which sometimes means we're committing to the annoying traits of our partner. And I also challenged you quite a bit in the last episode about whether you could be the possible problem in your relationship dynamics. And I said that when I'm talking about Juno with clients, I'm always pointing out, like, this is some of your shadow. Juno will tell us quickly about our shadow. In the last Juno episode that I'm going to do, I will go through Juno and the signs and the houses so that you can get a sense of how your particular Juno works. And, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, my long-term relationship needs a little help, or I need some insight, or I'm trying to understand something about my partner or myself, an astrology reading is a great way to dive into that. You can find me at electraastrology.com. And I do have a relationship reading that's specifically for looking at two people's charts together, business, friendship, romantic, whatever. So as you have been pondering this idea that some of these shortcomings, some of these commitments that you've made may be healthy, they may not be healthy. And there's the idea that even with Juno, are we able to overlook some of the stuff that feels problematic, but isn't so problematic that it would end the relationship? So today we're going to dive into the idea of the sacred partnership. If you're listening on Star Narratives, you're going to have an astrology forecast for the week following this. If you're on YouTube, the astrology forecast is released on Mondays under the playlist, The Path Ahead. So we're trying to get to a divine union. So when we're looking at Juno versus Venus, we are looking at the themes of Juno commitment, Venus attraction. So I want to give the caveat, so I don't have to keep repeating myself, that When we're looking at Juno, it can be any kind of relationship. It is largely a marital relationship, but it's any relationship that is longer term in nature, where there is a deep sense of commitment. So whether it's a business partnership, and you're literally signing contracts with one another, or a marriage, again, contracts, or it could be a really deep friendship that is just long and abiding. When we talk about friendships, there's so many different versions of friendships. There's our superficial friends, and there's the people that we've been friends with for a season that we haven't had contact with forever. There are the friends that we come back and forth into contact with. And then there are the friends that are like the die-hard, ride or die friends that you are together with for many, many years. So I would say that's more like a Juno commitment, where we were originally attracted, and that's Venus, we're originally attracted to this person. And then we deepen into making whatever kind of commitment we make, where we're going to stick together for as long as we possibly can. So then we start to transition into this idea of the divine union. So let's talk a little bit here about karmic partnerships versus sacred unions as they relate to astrology. We hear a lot about twin flames. Twin flames are often looked at as very karmic relationships. Whether you believe in twin flames or not, it's up for debate. But the karmic relationships tend to be the ones where we have to do a lot of work. There's a lot of spiritual lessons. There is a lot of conflict in the relationship. There's push and pull. And you've had relationships like that where it just feels like this person is hanging around. I'm not ending the relationship, or they just won't leave. And I keep having to push up against my sharp edges. So this is less like a Juno relationship. And this is more like what we would call a relationship if you have planets, especially relationship planets that are conjunct the South Node, or if you have Venus in the sign of Capricorn, if you have Saturn connected to somebody else's personal planets. And by personal planets, I mean Sun, Moon, Mars, Venus, Mercury. Now, the karmic lessons, the karmic relationships, you've had them before. Hopefully, with karmic relationships, we're able to go through the turmoil, end the relationship, walk away having developed a lot of growth and wisdom so that we don't have to keep repeating. We're hopefully not making extra long-term commitments to the kind of relationships that are karmic. Hopefully, they're in and they're out sooner than later. With Juno relationships, we are looking at this idea that yes, there are lessons and there will be hard edges that we bump up against. There will be frustrations. We will feel at various times betrayed or abandoned, but nothing that feels so huge that it becomes traumatizing. It can just be frustrating because the sacred unions are the ones that are meant to last. So we can look at Juno in our chart and get a really good sense of what are the qualities that we need in our relationships in order for them to last, in order for them to be deepened, in order for them to develop into a long-term bond. And bond really is one of the key words here. We are looking to bond to these people, to be able to go through hardship, ride the ups and the downs, work through, communicate through the difficulties, and get to a place where we're not having to learn the lesson and get out. And thank God in hindsight, we're out. We're getting in there. We're rolling up our sleeves. We're doing the deeper relationship work. And frankly, this is really hard. There are fewer couples that are able to do this because usually people get caught in their trauma. They get caught in their poor communication. They get caught in their resentment and their retaliation. And rather than being able to get through it and work through it, there is a stalling out that can happen with one or both sides. And this is why when I'm looking at charts, I say, hey, here's what you do under stress. Here is exactly what can go wrong for you. Here's what you're bringing to the table in your relationships that is going to eventually make or break the partnership. All of these archetypes have a real high side and a real low side. So if we get stalled out, we want the sacred divine union. We want the bond that's going to last long term. We want to keep showing up, doing the difficult work, working through our triggers, our resentments, and understanding, yes, some of the stuff that I've committed to would not be my first choice, but I'm going to stay. Then we have to get to the point where we are working continually on the higher side of our Juno archetype, as opposed to the lower side, because the lower side is where we get stalled out. And this is where we get to a place where we can't be in the relationship anymore. And we say, that's it. I have hit the wall. You're annoying. Because usually the difference between the karmic relationship and the sacred union that has potential is the karmic relationship is like kind of a train wreck from the get-go. And you probably knew that going into it. I can think of some of my karmic relationships where there were red flags all over the place that I totally ignored. And they became too loud at the end. And when I got out of those relationships, I looked back and thought, oh my God. Like, even if I had been showing up, working the exalted side of my relationship skills over and over, I was showing up as my very best, communicating clearly, owning my mistakes. The relationship still would not have lasted. It was not meant to last. But with a Juno relationship, this is where we're getting through it. This is where we just keep coming back. The problems are not big enough, not loud enough, not nasty enough for us to need to leave. And yet there's always a challenge. There's always a challenge in long-term relationship to keep showing up and doing the work, to keep self-improving and to keep looking at the self. And that's what's so important here. And I think culturally, a lot of us veer off into the finger pointing of it's their fault. They're the ones that upset me. They're the ones that are letting me down. They're the ones that screwed up. If we're really looking at navigating growth in a partnership, the growth has to start with you. You have to be able to look at yourself and identify where you get caught in your resentments, where you hold on to grievances, where you engage in power and control struggles, where you don't feel seen, where you're taking all of the air and all of the attention, where it's all about you, where you get super rigid and have all these rules that your partner has to follow. Like, I'm going through some of these zodiac archetypes right now, and I'm just laying out some of the problems that we can bring that actually perpetuate our relationship issues. So part of working with Juno is getting really clear that it's not the other person. In a karmic relationship, it can totally be the other person. They can be lying, cheating, being abusive. But in a sacred union, the problems have to be solved here. It's not about looking at the other person and saying, if you get better, then our relationship will be sustainable. It's about saying, I'm going to take responsibility for what's here, and I'm going to do my own personal work. If you get to a point in a sacred union where you're doing all of your personal work and your partner is not, then it's not going to be a union that's going to be sustainable. It's not going to last. But there's something about the energetic exchange in a divine union that actually activates the other. So if I'm doing my personal work and I'm taking responsibility for my own stuff and I'm saying, I got totally triggered about that thing that you just said, but I got triggered because it reminds me a lot of something that used to be said to me in childhood. And I felt like I was getting in trouble. But what I realized is that you weren't saying that because I was in trouble. Me perceiving that I was in trouble was my stuff. So I'm going to make a point to relate to our argument from a deeper sense of knowledge and understanding. I'm not blaming you. I'm saying to you, hey, when you say it like this, it can trigger me, but I'm not asking you to change. Now that ideally triggers your partner to do some introspective work of their own. And so that's really what we're going for. When we look at Juno, and we can look at Juno in two people's charts and get a really good indication of, is this going to be a partnership that has the potential to be a sacred union? Are there enough skills and resonance between these two to be able to work through some of these deeper issues? So Juno's really cool like that. It has so much information. It tells you where you're likely to veer off course, what the difficulties are that you're going to bring into long-term relationship. It also shows you what it is that you want and need in relationship and the kind of partner, the qualities in the kind of partner that you need. So I love astrology like this because we can get so much insight into our relational needs and our relational flaws simply by reading where Juno and also Venus lay in the chart. Now, intensity and challenge are also going to be a part of these Juno relationships. We will have power struggles in divine union as well as karmic partnerships, but the difference is that the power struggles in divine union can be resolved, especially if they are looked at through the lens of open-hearted honesty, of seeing that each person has a part and that each person is probably just reactive over old history. But we can work through the power struggles and then we become stronger. The idea with a Juno relationship is that we're going into a deep bond. We are learning to really trust one another, that we can make it through conflict without needing to end the relationship. We can make it through stress without making it the responsibility of the other person, without traumatizing the other person, or without, going through stress and ending up less traumatized, ending up with more wisdom than we had before the stress. So that's one thing that I really love about looking at Juno relationships is it shows us the potential. And there's such a sweet potential for these long-term relationships, but we have to understand that a lot of times the Juno aspect of relationship has to go through, first of all, a lot of time. So whether that's like you're somebody that got together with your partner when you were 20 and you're still together, hopefully you're working on these Juno themes, or you've had several different relationships through the course of your life. There's a sense of maturity. And we know mythologically that when Juno, also known as Hera, and Zeus, also known as Jupiter, got together, they had a lot of conflict in their relationship. Remember, I talked in the first episode that Juno just acted out all the time. She was resentful and bitter and retaliatory. And of course, Jupiter, as the husband, was also acting out. He was doing what he wanted. He was living his own best life, regardless of the commitments that he had made to her. But somewhere along the line, presumably, they were able to work it out. So this is also a way of saying that sometimes the karmic relationships will work out, but only if there is a sense of self-awareness and a sense of deepening into your spiritual relationship with self, first and foremost, and then obviously with the partner. But as we're looking at all of these archetypes, the key thing here is around self-awareness. More self-aware that we are when we're able to identify what throws us off balance and what we need in a partnership and how we get caught in our Virgo-esque, right? That part of us that wants to control, that gets really caught up in the mistakes of our partner, that feels like, I didn't commit to this, and I'm going to retaliate. I'm going to act out. So that's another key theme here is acting out. As you're progressing through the next week, before we get into Juno through the houses and signs, which will be next week, continue looking at your relationships, whether they are your business partnerships, your long-term marital partnerships, or your very deeply bonded friendships, or the relationships that you have with family members that are maybe through marriage, not blood related, but the kind of long-term relationship that you're stuck with. Begin looking at how you're relating to these people. Notice the ones that feel very easy, where there's a depth, where you're able to grow. You've been able to have really potent, honest conversations with one another over the years and feel into the strength of those bonds. Really get a sense of what it feels like to be held in this deep friendship, this deep relationship. And you can look at the relationships that are longer term in your lives that there's difficulty and there's struggle, and you might actually be responsible for some of that struggle. And looking at your part in how do I act out? How do I respond? What grievances am I holding on to? And then you can also, since we've been talking about it, take a look at some of the karmic partnerships that you're either engaged in now or that you have had in the past, and do some introspecting. Like, why did that person come into my life? What did I learn? What were the red flags that I ignored? What was I needing to see about myself when it came to how I chose partners, how I let people in, how I maybe was one of the problems, how I acted out in my own mania and made bad decisions, right? Like we all have these multi-layered relationships with one another. And as we're in all of this Aquarius energy, we have Pluto here. So we're doing Pluto for the next 20-ish years, where we're really supposed to be dialing into our relationships and getting a sense of how we show up and what they feel like. And hopefully, we're getting some good information about our habits and routines that end up creating poor foundation for relationships, and the part of us that wants to keep showing up, even when it's hard, even when we've made a mistake, even when we have to apologize, where we just keep showing up and doing the work, as they say, right? Moving toward a deeper understanding of self and the person that we're in partnership. Because if you want Juno relationships, if you want sacred partnerships, divine union, these aren't the relationships that just show up and it's always good and always easy. There is a requirement that you become vulnerable, that you share things about yourself, that you see your own BS, that you call yourself out when you are acting like a jerk, or when you're holding tight to some sort of resentment or some sort of desire, or you're on your soapbox. We have to be able to see that about ourselves, and we have to be able to work with the other. And, they're going to have the same stuff. They're going to have the same issues as we are. And if they can show up and work with you, and you can show up and work with them, this is how we really get to these long-term, strongly bonded partnerships that we all want, right? We all want these people in our lives that we can depend on, that are going to love us even when we're imperfect. We're going to love even when they're imperfect, when, we've committed to their bad habit of talking too much, or we've committed to their bad habit of being a know-it-all. Like, the people in our lives that we are long-term bonded with, they are not perfect, and we are not perfect. And yet there's something about this deepening, deepening, deepening into relationship with others that is a huge part of what we're doing here as humans. We are embodied. We're wanting to feel love. We're wanting to work through the chaos that can show up in relationship. And Juno in the chart gives you some really good insight into what that looks like for you. So we're going to get into that next week, talking about what Juno looks like for you. That's going to be a good episode. All right. Well, I hope this was helpful, and I will see you all soon.